Who's ready for a deep dive?
Are you having any negative thoughts? All I have are negative thoughts.
Hey everybody, Lindsay here, and this is my review for Joker. Joker. Not the Joker, Joker. This is one of the most anticipated and talked about films of this year. I was excited to go see it just because I wanted to see that gritty, realistic take on this character, kind of like how they did in The Dark Knight, and just wondering if this was going to connect to the main Batman mythos, if not, just how they were going to construct this film and what all the hubbub was about. And Joaquin Phoenix is a good actor, and I wanted to see his take on this role. Usually at the beginning of my reviews, I tell the basic story or the plot. I don't think that's needed with this film. A majority of people know what the character of the Joker is and can kind of surmise what this movie is all about. Also, this film is very hard to talk about in depth without going into spoilers. So this first section, I'm going to use a broad brush to talk about the film, and then later on I will go into more detail with a spoiler section, but I will warn you before I get into that. So overall, general thoughts on the film. I did like it. I enjoyed it. I wasn't bored. I was entertained. It took about 10 to 15 minutes for the film to really draw me in, but after that I was fully invested into what was going on. There was only one or two spots where it kind of lost me, and I think that had nothing to do with Joaquin Phoenix's performance. He is the best thing about this film. His performance is just captivating, and he does a lot without saying much. Just through his body movements, his facial expressions, his fidgeting and fussing with stuff, and how he reacts to people, it's told almost completely nonverbal. You know what he's going through and what he's feeling by how he's moving his body, what he's doing. There's music and things that also add into that to inform the audience, but an overwhelming majority of it is his performance that comes through. I really liked the style of it. It was very, very gritty and stark and realistic. It's set in the extreme early 80s, and the color palettes and costumes and set design really fit that time period well. And also some of the social aspects of what's going on in the film really fit that time period as well. Another positive I will say about this film that doesn't give away anything about it is that you could lift the Batman mythos completely out of this film, and that character's connection to Batman, you could completely remove that, and it still stands on its own as a film without all of that. That just adds greater implications on what's happening, but it doesn't, the story doesn't hinge on that. The violence is extremely blunt, and it's in your face. They don't cut away from it. You see it, and it's shocking in some parts, and surprising, and very, very brutal. And I think it is so shocking because it's handled very nonchalantly in some places. My major criticism of the film, and I'll get into it more in depth in the spoiler section of this review, is just I wasn't as blown away as I thought it was going to be. I mean, this film had a ton of hype around it, and I don't think any film could live up to those expectations when there's so much press out there about how this is a dangerous film, it's a dangerous character, and it could incite violence and all that kind of stuff. That puts the bar pretty high as to the level that this film will hit, and I don't think it hits that bar. It kind of did in one or two sequences, but as a whole, I don't think it did. And I was also hoping that it would kind of transcend all of the media coverage around it, but I don't think it did that either. And at least when I personally left the theater, I wasn't uplifted in any way, and there was no cathartic satisfaction to be gained by the ending. At least I didn't see it that way. You just kind of leave the theater feeling a little numb and just overwhelmed by how much stuff there is to process with this film. This is definitely a film that will spark a lot of interesting discussion between people, and I think an overwhelming majority of people that go see this film are going to be more or less ambivalent about how they feel about it. They're not going to rave about it in the positive or the negative. It'll just be a conversation piece, more or less. But if you haven't seen it, I'd recommend seeing it. It's a fascinating character study. The performances are really good. It's shot well. I like the music in it. It's very good, and it adds to the storytelling. So I think if you go in with modest expectations and not have this thing built up into your head to something, I think you will enjoy it regardless. So let's talk some spoilers. So if you have not seen the film yet, skip to this time code. And first and foremost, I want to talk about the character of Joker in this film. I mean, I think it's even a much more realistic depiction than Heath Ledger's Joker, because all of the other Jokers that we've seen, they're crazy and, they're nihilistic and they love anarchy and all this stuff. Whereas in this film, it is portrayed as straight mental illness. And I think they did a very good job of showing just the levels that this character hits psychologically to get to that crescendo at the end where he's willing to kill himself on national television. I mean, that's not what happens. He changes his plan, he changes his horse midstream. But everything that they pile on top of the psychological ramifications that this character is dealing with, as far as abuse that he suffered as a child by his mother, and just physical trauma and brain injury, being perceived as an other due to this, and failings of the mental health system. And they really go into depth on creating a psychological profile that is somewhat believable. It's not fantastical. It's not pulled out of, a comic book. This is much more realistic. And in portraying the Joker that way, yes, it's scary because there are people out there like this that can snap at any moment and do things like this and have done things like this, but it almost is borderline sympathetic the way it's portrayed, and that really tests the audience and where your morals stand, because this is a person who has killed people and will go on to kill more people, but he is shown where to him his actions have real life justification, and that really messes with the audience's head, I think. Because when he kills the 3 guys on the subway, they were beating the shit out of him and he was defending himself. Did he have to chase that other guy down and kill him? No. When he kills his former coworker in his apartment, did that guy deserve to get killed? No, but he sees him as, he's the reason that he got fired, and all of these dominoes, chain reaction events that led to where he is. That was one of the building blocks of that. So it's hard not to see his justification. And I like the moral ambiguity that this film plays with when it comes to the audience, because if you really start to think about it, it kind of fucks with your head. Because when he's sitting there on the Robert De Niro's talk show and he says, you know, I killed those 3 people on the subway, and the only reason you care is because of who they were. They were these young, rich people. If it was me, you would not care. And I think that's a pretty fitting social commentary about how we feel about other human beings. And I think it's a pretty fair indictment. Another thing that I liked about his character was the fact that he was an unreliable narrator. And this is where the film first really drew me in, was that first fantasy sequence at the beginning of the film where he's fantasizing being on Robert De Niro's talk show and being brought out of the audience and down on the stage and being applauded for who he is and what he does and how he takes care of his mother, and that he's a person and he's being noticed. And that was the part that really drew me in, was that whole sequence. And then we find out later, which I could kind of see coming a little bit, was his whole relationship with the neighbor girl, played by Zazie Beetz, was a complete fabrication in his head. And I kind of was suspecting that all along, because I'm like, she's a really good looking woman who seems very put together. I don't see why she would be wasting her time with the mentally disturbed loner down the hall. When the audience is finally shown that, yes, indeed, it was all a delusion, I don't think we needed the little flashback segments showing that no one was there when he was opening the door or sitting in the hospital. I think we could kind of gather by her reaction to him in her apartment that they have zero relationship, and she only knows that he's the guy, the weirdo that lives down the hall. I don't think they needed to spell it out to the audience that clearly. I think that was a little bit overdone. I think we got the picture just from her reaction of him sitting there on the couch. Another thing I really want to criticize, and it's not about the film, it's about the marketing. I only watched the teaser trailer, but there were several other trailers out there that I'm assuming a lot of people watched. But also, this film was so talked about and in the media a lot. A lot of the images from those trailers they're just all over the place on the internet. And a lot of those images showed the turning points in the character's psyche, and also scenes that were kind of fulcrums in the plot. And so when you go see the movie, you're starting to see the context clues of leading up to where those images are going to come in the film. And I think that really softens those hits. Like, you see him dancing down the stairs. We had this great metaphor of these huge concrete stairs that he is trudging up every night. And that is just a symbol for where he is in this life, just struggling to get somewhere, to climb. And then when he is leaving to go to the talk show, he is on top of the world and he's in this suit and he's got his makeup on and he's dancing down those stairs. And that's a great metaphor. And it was really softened because I'm sitting there watching the movie and I'm seeing this metaphor being built of him walking and trudging and struggling up these stairs. But I know in the back of my head, I've already seen him dancing down these stairs. So I know where this metaphor is going to lead. So that just kind of strips it of that power. And another example is at the beginning when he gets jumped by the young street toughs. You know he's gonna get hit with that sign and that he's gonna get beaten up. And in another sequence they showed the confrontation between him and Thomas Wayne in the bathroom where he gets punched in the face. You know, while you're sitting there watching the movie and he's sneaking into the theater to confront Thomas Wayne, you know it's not gonna go well. You know he's gonna get punched in the face because of what you've seen. So those emotional beats are just amputated. And getting back to how the Batman lore could be lifted out of this film, I think in a lot of instances, it really overshadows what's going on because you're constantly thinking, okay, how does this tie into the Batman mythos? And I think that can be really distracting to what's actually going on in the film, because we see young Bruce Wayne and they have an interaction, and then there's this possibility that they're half brothers, and so you're not actually paying attention to the storyline in this film. You're thinking, oh wow, this has a lot of implications to the greater Batman narrative, and I think that's a detriment to this film. So if you kind of look at it through the perspective of it not being a Joker film or a Batman film, just looking at it as a great character study, I think it holds up a lot better as a film. But I do think the ending works a lot, because all of this leads up to pretty much the creation of Batman, because when all hell breaks loose after he kills Robert De Niro live on his television show, there's chaos in the streets, people are rioting, and this is when Thomas Wayne and Martha Wayne and little Bruce Wayne, they're coming out of the theater, and all this stuff is going on, and people are being mugged and beaten, and fires being set and looting and all this violence going on, and they try to escape down an alley, and that's where the infamous parent murder happens. That is the genesis of Batman right there, the murder of his parents. And then we switch to Joaquin Phoenix in Arkham Asylum, talking to a caseworker, whoever, and he's laughing, and he says he was just thinking about a joke, and she's like, oh, what's the joke? And he's like, oh, you wouldn't get it. Well, he's laughing because he thinks that Bruce Wayne being orphaned is the funniest joke ever, because the Joker sees it as, this is a kid who had a mom and had a dad and had all this wealth and prosperity, and everybody knew who he was, but it was still taken away. And that's a perfect funhouse mirror to the Joker's upbringing, where he has no idea who his father really is. Was he adopted? Was he not adopted? And he has a crazy mother, and he's living in filth, and no one knows who he is, and no one gives a shit about him. So he thinks that's really funny. And also, just going back to Joaquin Phoenix's performance, it was so good. He did such a good job. And I talked earlier about how he portrayed so much without saying very much. And it was, I think the best example of that is in the bathroom scene right after he finishes killing the three yuppies in the subway. And he runs and he barricades himself in this bathroom, and he's holding the door closed, and then all of a sudden he just starts this body movement into a dance, and he's got the clown makeup on because he'd just come from work, and the camera's moving around him as he's doing this, it's almost like an awakening, and he turns with his arms furled out to see himself in the mirror. And that's such a great transformative moment, because it's like, here I really am. I'm being seen, I'm being noticed. I feel control for the first time in my life. And I think that's one of the more powerful moments in the film, is that scene right there, that transformation. And it's done with no dialogue. It's all through characterization and camera movement and body movement. And that was probably my favorite scene of the film.
Is this a joke to you?
I could probably talk on and on about this film. There's endless stuff to discuss as far as the greater implications for the Batman story, Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal, the societal implications of this film, violence, comedy, mental health, all of it. You could talk for hours about this stuff, and I think this film does a good job of sparking conversation. But overall, I really did enjoy it. I really like psychological characters where you can really do a deep dive and figure out what made them into what they are. And you can see that progression of where a person can get to a certain point where they just snap. And let me tell you, my BA may be in English, but I had a psych minor, so I am 100% qualified to talk about this stuff. And also, as someone who likes to act, picking apart a performance like this and just searching through the levels is a lot of fun for me. Well, that's gonna do, ooh, I burped. Well, that's gonna do it for this review. So until next time, this is Lindsay signing off. I'll check you later.